So,
how did the syndicate fund deal with the question of outcomes, and what's, Alex, your pitch when you're taking it around?
The Clark Foundation was one of the first to put their stake in the ground and say, well, that's great, but if we're going to put large sums of money, philanthropic dollars, into organizations so that they can reach significantly, exponentially more people, which requires lots of money, then let's have an evidence base around understanding that these organizations really do work. And so that,
you want to chat about that?
Yeah.
and what's the question? Whether that how much that was important to the other co-investors, or if we had to sort of sell them on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to dig in a little. I mean, this is stuff we talk about every week. This performance stuff.
So you don't want to talk about it again?
No, I'm trying, but I want to talk about in terms of the theme of this week, in terms of the sort of different kinds of infrastructure that's emerging in a nonprofit. And so the intermediate, or the syndicate fund, is interesting because it touches on another frustration that we've expressed, that grant makers don't collaborate, and so there's extra burdens on nonprofits. So here's a model where you said, okay, you know what, we're going to come around, lots of money, same kind of reporting.
Right.
And so the question of, well, what qualifies as an appropriate kind of report, how linked is that to outcomes, and how central was that to the development of the syndicate fund, I guess is the question.
I mean, I guess the first thing is we started with the three organizations, really two of which really have proven models based on kind of the gold standard of random control trials. So we wanted to lead with sort of what we had the most confidence in, and see if others were interested in getting behind those three. So that was like the starting premise, and we wouldn't have done it, I don't think, with anybody else, because we wouldn't, I mean, it's almost like a moral issue for us. We don't want to put lots of our foundation's money and encourage lots of other people to put, I mean, literally, well, 120 million behind three organizations if you're not really confident that they're having the impact that they say they're having. So that was sort of a fundamental concept. But what I think attracted the other co-investors beyond just the grantees themselves, which is much more important than us coming to them and saying, let's raise $120 million.
Yeah.
It was the plans, it was their track record, it was the leadership. I mean, they let's not kid ourselves, the organizations sold themselves. I mean, it wouldn't have worked, I would say, with many other organizations, because these guys really had the track record. But then I think that what was slightly different, and what the spin we put on it, is that, look, we'll really stake our reputation. We'll take the lead. We'll put our own money in. Our grantee boards have said they'll commit millions of dollars to this, so they're showing an ownership stake. We'll have really clearly vetted plans and really clear metrics. So even though you're putting all this money in up front, where we'll track progress is on the draw of the growth capital. So that organizations...
Are the metrics outcome related, or are they organizational growth related?
Absolutely.
And when you deal with the outcome related stuff, sort of what was the level of discussion? Where did those metrics come from, that kind of stuff?
Well, the metrics all come from not
Same stuff.
They're all in the plans.
Yeah.
The performance metrics, the
more
financials.
random controlled trials and that kind of stuff? Or?
No, not necessarily. Although two of the organizations are doing additional research, sort of the next phase of their research, which is important. Citizen Schools, which is one of the organizations that hadn't done a random control trial, is now launching a random control trial. And Youth Villages, which implements a proven intervention, multi-systemic therapy for foster kids who are transitioning back into the community. We're doing a whole suite of additional services, particularly for kids who are transitioning out of the foster care system, aging out of the foster care system, and didn't have the same level of evidence. And so Gates was like, how can you call them proven if they're doing all these other things? Let's think about supporting a next level of evidence. So there is also a research agenda built in. But in addition, there's a whole set of performance metrics that they're tracking to ensure quality and all that good stuff.
And on the growth funding that you guys are doing, I assume it's growth in the sense that they draw it down and then they're somewhat sustainable with predictable revenue streams of philanthropy and all that. There's also a sort of underlying assumption, I guess, that if they are able to demonstrate all these metrics that have laid out in the growth, that additional capital will flow to the organizations because they've been proven. What's been your what's the flip side of that? What are your concerns? What sort of, and particularly given the sense, Lisa, that this kind of stuff may not be on the top of everybody's mind in the philanthropic world. Like, how, when you hear this, does that make you say, oh, you know what, I want to encourage all the foundations that I manage and my high net worth people to look at this kind of stuff? Or are you kind of like, well, that's nice, we'll see where it goes? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's good. Let's hear that.
Or not, you don't even necessarily have to speak for you, but how do you think the field in general reacts?
Okay, how do I think the field in general reacts? I think that the long-time staffed foundations, local funders who know their community of, let's say, youth organizations, feel like, oh yeah, we've known Bob was great forever. We've been funding Bob forever. You know, oh, we paid to help citizen schools come to New York. You know, so I think that a lot of the field feels like through their old-fashioned processes of talking to groups, visiting them, reading everything about them, talking to other funders, that in many ways they're coming up with a similar conclusion without a lot of hoo-ha, you know?
Yeah.
Like they, you know, like, oh, we've been doing that for a long time, or we got there too.
Yeah.
So I think there's that sense out there. And then I go back to the personal thing. So, you know, so I think I've done this game with professional grant makers as a kind of icebreaker where, you know, they're all doing their strategy and they're doing public policy grant making and they've got their whole thing that they've spent a long time on, and then you ask them, okay, well, think about your own charitable giving last year. What did you do? And then they kind of go, oh, well, my friend's on this board, and, you know, and they did this sort of classic, you know, I did my church and I did my this and they did that, and they didn't do anything strategic in their personal, modest giving. And they get a little embarrassed about it because they're professionals in the field. And, you know, and it's just to say kind of the human nature thing, you know, someone who cares about kids, they've met a really compelling human being who does great work for kids, and so they're wanting to support that person. And, you know, that's great, and they'll read some of the lists, and that's nice, but those other things might have more funding going there, so I'm going to stick with this kind of personal touch thing that I know. So there's a little bit of that.